Monday, May 30th, Memorial Day, when we figured out a couple people, nobody had heard from my son for a couple days.
He lived in this camper, and when no one heard from him on Memorial Day weekend, his Idaho family traveled to his farm. It was abandoned. On the Box Elder County Sheriff's Facebook page, they consider it a missing persons case.
It's not a good investigation, and they haven't done their job. This is our son. This is our child that they totally disregarded.
His mom is full of shit. First of all, she just got out of a mental facility the last 4 days.
It's a sexy case. You got a good-looking little kid, owns a farm, good story. Mom looks like she'd be at the top of the pyramid of a cheerleading squad, right?
I was frustrated, like many of you, when I saw the deplorable way in which the private investigator they hired had been acting.
Jim Terry is gone.
These people that have come after me, Jim Terry TV will expose them all. Their backgrounds, their height, their weight, their houses, videos outside.
But she was getting slammed, and it wasn't bad with me, and I was disgusted in humanity.
We're not going away, and we're not giving up, and people got to realize we are dead serious on that. We're not going to fade into the background and be like, we'll never know. We will get to the bottom of it one way or another.
This is Dylan Rounds. Just over a year ago, Dylan went missing. When he went missing, he was 19 years old, weighed 160 pounds, is 5'10", and had brown hair and brown eyes. According to Dylan's parents, he's been singularly focused on being a farmer since he was a very young child. He grew up in eastern Idaho, where he had access to tractors and farm equipment, and went all the way through high school working to save up to buy his farm. He's that rare kind of kid that you won't find buried in his phone or on a video game. You'd more than likely find him in his favorite boots, working toward his goal of becoming a farmer. Dylan's grandparents helped him buy a farm in Lucin, Utah when he was 17. He was a part-time resident of Lucin when he was tending to his harvest and went back and forth from Utah to Idaho, where he stayed with the family or with his grandparents in their house when he wasn't at the farm. When he was at the farm, he stayed in a camper on site, and when he wasn't tending to his farm, he was hanging out with the few locals that are in the area at their houses or at the local bar. Now, just like all farmers, Dylan started his mornings early. On the morning of May 28th, 2022, Dylan talked to his grandmother at around 6:51 a.m., but please don't come at me if I'm wrong about that specific time or about any specifics in this. This is more about analysis of what happened with the case on YouTube than about the actual case. Now, just before he hung up, he told his grandmother that it was about to rain, so he needed to get his grain truck inside the shed to prevent the seeds in the truck from sprouting. He told his grandmother that he would call her back, but she never heard from him again, and that was the last time any family heard from Dylan. May 28th was a Saturday. According to Dylan's mom, Candace Cooley, she had talked to Dylan the previous Thursday, and though she had texted him a few times that weekend and hadn't heard back from him, she wasn't worried yet because it was normal for him to get busy. And she didn't get worried until they heard from Dylan's best friend, who contacted the family to say he wasn't able to reach Dylan. Dylan's family sprung into action when everyone they could reach in and around Lucin had no idea where he was. His parents are divorced, but both went to Dylan's farm on Monday, May 30th. Again, don't come at me if I'm wrong about that date. But it was roughly a couple days after they found out nobody could find him, and they broke into his camper and couldn't find any trace of him anywhere, including his phone or his wallet or his truck key fob or his gun. However, his truck was still parked there, but it was locked, which was unusual. So they broke into his truck to see if his guns were there and determined that the driver's seat had been moved and that someone had tried to put it in four-wheel drive, not knowing that the four-wheel drive wasn't working on the truck at that time. The family later noticed that the truck had also been power washed, but there was mud in the wheel wells. Now, Dylan's family also found that his work boots had been tossed aside at a dirt pile on his farm, and say that this was highly suspicious to them because Dylan was the type of kid who wore only one kind of boot, one brand of boot, and the only way they would come off of him is if he took them off himself to go to sleep. Now, even weirder, after that first day of turning his camper upside down for his key fob and his gun and his wallet and his phone, and they couldn't find it anywhere during that search, but they returned the next day to find the key fob where it wasn't before, then returned the day after that to find his gun placed in the camper where it wasn't before. No fingerprints could be lifted off of either of them, so they had obviously been wiped down and snuck back into the camper by someone who knew there was a search going on. Dylan's family reported him missing while they were in Lucin searching for him, and little did they know what obstacles they would face ahead in their desperate quest to find their son. Now think about everything I just told you about the kind of kid Dylan is, and now close your eyes and picture yourself being his mother and not being able to find him. You and his father are divorced, but you've come together in this crisis to find your kid. You engage the local police department. You start posting on social media. You start talking to all of his friends. You post flyers locally. You start searches. And if you have the resources, which Dylan's family has, luckily, you hire a private investigator. Now, this is where we also need to step back and think about all of the obstacles that a family faces when a person goes missing. The first obstacle tends to be law enforcement. Even in the best conditions, parents rarely feel that law enforcement is doing enough, or acting fast enough, or being thorough enough. This gets complicated when the missing person lives in an incredibly remote area in a town with something like 3 people that's sitting on the border of 2 states. Dylan's family was faced with all of these obstacles when they reported him missing, and they say police didn't really take them seriously and that they were mocked.
Why would Justin and I never contact
We have
about
recordings of all the people
them
talking.
lying to us. They wouldn't let us bring in bloodhounds. They didn't want the dogs out there, which they would have picked up on Dylan's scent knowing what was in the grain shed now. When the key fob was found, when the gun was found, when the boots were found, they literally laughed at us and mocked us in that desert. They were ignorant, they were arrogant, they lied, and we got proof of it.
Whether all these things are true or not is hard to tell, but we do know that by the time law enforcement really got engaged, the crime scene had been trampled all over by everyone looking for Dylan, and a lot of clues that could have been found with an early investigation were missed or damaged. If you're a true crime follower, you probably know what families do when they're faced with these obstacles. If they have the resources, they will engage private parties to help them. Well, true crime followers are not the only people who know this. Private investigators also know this is an issue, and that there's people out there desperately looking for help finding their loved one. Most of the time, these families will create missing persons groups on Facebook, and they start posting on social media, and they start talking to the press. It's at this point in a missing persons case when families are the most exposed and the most vulnerable to appeals from the private investigator's version of the infamous ambulance chaser, the missing persons poster chaser. These shysters comb social media for missing persons posters, especially those that have high reward funds attached to them, which Dylan's did for a time, and they contact the family with an offer they can't refuse. Knowing that these families are probably already frustrated with law enforcement, they offer impossible guarantees about their ability to find their family member. For a price, of course.
Preys on their parents, gets them in there when they're vulnerable, tries to say, okay, well, I'll be the cheapest guy. You know, you can hire anybody for like $100,000 down and this and that, but you can just pay me $2,500 and I'll find them dead or alive, I guarantee it. So he found me early on in the search for Tabor. I had posted in the OB, Lost People of OB in California, and he commented, call me like immediately, like in all caps. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy knows where my son is. So of course I called him. Jim Terry reached out to me in a comment and he told me, hey, call me ASAP. And I thought, oh wow, this guy knows where my kid is, you know, so I called him. And he said, hey, some media outlets have reached out to me, some local media outlets, which is weird because he didn't even know where I was at.
In our rational minds, it's easy to see that Jim Terry practiced a number of deceptions. Not only did he appeal to their sense of urgency with an all-caps comment, he lured them in by saying he had information and that the media had told him to contact the family. He not only portrayed himself as someone who already had vital information, he also pretended to be a media insider. This would give any desperate family the false impression that he had ability and connections that could bolster their search and make him more indispensable to them. Now take yourself into the mind of any family member who's in crisis mode, ready to do anything to find their family member. It's really daunting to think about how to find a private investigator. I mean, where to start? And what family member has time to do the kind of vetting they would need to do to see if this private investigator is legit? How convenient is it that Jim Terry reaches out to the family at precisely their time of need, offering all the best guarantees? Again, missing persons poster chasers know this. For them, it's just another vulnerability for them to exploit. These maneuvers worked with Dylan's family, but only for a short time. Since none of us were there, it's impossible to say exactly what happened to cause Dylan's family to fire Jim exactly. But to the credit of the family, it took just weeks for them to figure out that they didn't want him around, and they fired him. Now, what would you expect a normal, rational, legitimate private investigator to do when he's fired by a family? They'd move on to the next client, because if they are really legit, they'll have no problem getting hired by another family. God knows people go missing every day. That's not what Jim Terry did. True to missing persons poster chaser form, Jim Terry took the knowledge and experience from his investigation into the Dylan Rounds case and made it into a YouTube cash tag. It's hard to tell what happened first, whether he started appearing on other channels first or whether he started his own channel first. But from a true crime viewer's perspective, he seemed to burst into the algorithm when the Dylan Rounds case was getting the most airtime on national and social media. For a period of weeks, Jim Terry's appearances on other true crime channels combined with clips from his own channel dominated true crime feeds. When you hear the upcoming set of clips of Jim Terry talking, you'll probably understand why he was getting a lot of attention on YouTube. Thanks, algorithm. It wasn't good attention, though. The algorithm doesn't care about that, obviously. Attention is attention. The attention amounted to a community-wide revolt around the absolutely vile and disgusting things he said about the family, the victim, the town, the police, and anyone connected to the case. He didn't save these comments for people involved in the case. He also displays an abnormal amount of hostility toward entire groups, classes, and genders of people. When you listen to him talk now, imagine hearing these words when you hit a YouTube link tagged with your missing son's name.
You're the one that's you're like a former crackhead or something.
Oh yeah, and you're a fucking former football player. I seen you're a fucking kicker, I'm not dude.
Or anything, partner. I have a career. You're a fucking drug addict.
You know what? You're talking about the girl that went missing in California. I don't think there's much of a cover-up. I think she was a little skis. She went out there, she made some bad choices, and she died. 16 years old, and that little whore was out in the fucking woods doing coke with 30-year-olds. She knew what she was getting into.
Women make the best private investigators, especially for missing persons. I don't know why that is, but in my estimation, that's always been the case. I don't have an ego. I try to take that from female private investigators.
I got somebody I'm paying to go to the games to get videos, and you know what they're filming? Him eating fucking oranges, because his soft-ass fucking head got a concussion. Because this woman's a fucking loon. She's a nut job. She's a whack job.
He's so
Says the whack. By the way, you didn't hire me. Most cases I have, I hate the fucking people that go missing, because a lot of them are assholes.
The YouTube true crime community's patience with Jim Terry lasted about as long as the family's did.
I was so disturbed by the lack of decorum and professionalism that I've seen in those cases and on some YouTube channels.
Within a few weeks, Jim Terry had acted so horribly on YouTube that he started getting called out by clip channels and true crime commentators. Since Jim Terry has a propensity for issuing threats to dox and stalk true crime families, some channels took it upon themselves to expose Jim's background, and Jim's background is not good. That was the state of affairs when it came to Jim Terry and YouTube for several months. This content, featuring moments like these.
Matter of fact, I'm gonna call you and tell you right now what a bitch you are. Stay on the line. Yeah, return everybody's money. Everyone's.
Just done. I'm done with you.
I got a couple of phone calls into some college coaches about your son. If you think that kid gets a scholarship, that fat bastard, anywhere, it'll be over my dead body.
Was actively fighting against other content in the algorithm that didn't focus on conflict and were just trying to help the family get out awareness about their missing son and maybe even search for them. And yes, that was the state of affairs when it came to Jim Terry on YouTube until a hammer came down in the name of Rolling Stone magazine. If this hit piece on Jim Terry isn't proof that the myth of any press is good press is complete bullshit, I don't know what else is. The Rolling Stone article revealed that Jim Terry not only has questionable credentials, but also has a documented history of chasing after and abusing the families of missing persons. It wasn't long after this extremely damning and detailed piece came out that YouTube shut down his channel.
Jim Terry is gone.
Gone.
Yep, he is gone.
Jim Terry is now toiling away in the obscurity of Rumble, where he refuses to recognize the unfortunate reality that wherever you go, there you are.
Candace Cooley or Justin Rounds or anybody from that family, the grandparents, any of his close friends, his siblings, their attorneys, there are people over there that would like to know that this is going to happen and don't know this channel exists.
It's been just over a year since Dylan Rounds went missing, and even though a suspect has been indicted on murder charges, his family is still desperately looking for him. To their credit, the family has not diverted away from their purpose by the missing persons poster chaser. They have marched ahead, employing every legitimate resource they can to help find their son. They do regular updates with the Idaho News, they give interviews to national news outlets, they've cooperated with several larger YouTubers on legitimate searches for Dylan, and they've engaged the local community to remind them that Dylan is still missing. There was a $200,000 reward for any information leading to finding Dylan, but since the indictment of Jim Brenner, the primary suspect, they have revoked that reward, feeling that law enforcement has all the information they need at this point. Now that I've told you this story, I want to also make a few observations about how all of this played out. First of all, I have to address the elephant in the room. To me, this is a massive elephant because I'm a pattern watcher. And so are my viewers. So you probably know what I'm going to say. It's impossible to get through a story like this without recognizing a pattern of behavior across CashTaggers that are very, very similar. So the elephant in the room is this. A scammer is a scammer is a scammer. And they will scam wherever they go, including YouTube True Crime. And when they scam, they will use techniques that are recognizable across situations. Scammers will always choose marks with some sort of vulnerability. There are romance scammers, there are psychic scammers, scammers for every point in your life when you need help from professionals the most, like an ambulance chaser or a missing persons poster chaser. The scammer will always show up offering what you need when you need it the most. For missing persons or true crime families, they show up as private investigators or nonprofits or journalists. They show up with promises to help you for all the right reasons, when in reality, they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. And guess what? The algorithm brought them to you. Since there's so many people like Jim Terry on YouTube, and all of their crimes are documented by clip channels and commentators, why do they still have their channels when he doesn't? Well, it would take someone from YouTube to tell us the real reason why, and I mean inside YouTube. And we'll never get that. So I'm going to take an educated guess, reminding you that I've done public relations in the tech industry for 25 years and worked at Google when they were in the process of buying YouTube. There's one big difference between Jim Terry and the other CashTaggers and missing persons poster chasers. Jim Terry was torn down with credible evidence by a mainstream media outlet. That put Jim Terry on YouTube's radar. Whether it's right or it's wrong, these corporations will fold to external pressure before they fold to internal pressure. Internal pressure would be all the reports that users make against YouTube creators using the little flag on the lower right of the video or on the About page. The more that button is hit, the more internal pressure there will be to closely review a channel. External pressure would be any criticism that comes from outside the platform, like a well-reported Rolling Stone article. There's another difference between Jim Terry and many of these other CashTaggers, and that difference is that he is a man. Whether it's right or wrong, true crime is a genre dominated by women. But for some reason, when women in true crime match the language and behavior of Jim Terry's, it's virtually overlooked. In my opinion, people's double standards have allowed them to overlook when a woman behaves in this way, so they're less likely to hit that report button, resulting in less amount of internal pressure. But even if there was some internal pressure, it hasn't been matched by external pressure at all. It's clear to people watching closely that other CashTaggers' vulturous behaviors are just as newsworthy, but until the press deems it newsworthy, YouTube is very unlikely to pay much attention because there's no outside pressure. What would it take for press to make it newsworthy? Who knows? I guess somebody's gonna have to get really, really hurt. Finally, I want to hold up Dylan Rounds' family as a very helpful and instructive case study in maintaining their strength, focus, and dignity in the face of overwhelming and unforeseen and ridiculous obstacles. They recognized the toxicity early and they parted ways with it as soon as they could. When they did, they faced intense verbal abuse and continued to focus on finding their son. They never matched Jim Terry's hostility-fueled energy. They expressed their legitimate frustration over being scammed by a scammer, but they didn't dwell on it and they moved on.
Who our son was, knowing what he would do in our position is what has kept me going forward.
We've recently learned that Jim Brenner, the suspect in the case, has revealed that he knows where the body is and has offered to tell where it is in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. Considering how desperately the family wants to find their son, this has to be incredibly tempting to accept. But as testimony to their focus and resolve for justice, they rejected this plea deal and have vowed to find Dylan themselves. In my opinion, if Jim Brenner knows where Dylan is, there are people close to Jim Brenner who also know where Dylan Rounds is, and hopefully at some point will make contact with police to help bring justice to Dylan and help his family find him. If you have any information that would lead to locating this wonderful young man who didn't deserve to be murdered, follow the contact information on the screen or use the links I've added in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and please remember to be kind online, and don't forget the algorithm because anyone can be manipulated. Peace out.